The moment Elena Vasquez realized the dangerous man who'd been testing her for weeks wasn't just another arrogant customer changed everything she thought she knew about her quiet life. What she didn't know was that her perfect Spanish and fearless attitude had just marked her as either his greatest asset or his most dangerous enemy. Share where you're watching from in the comments. Thanks for your support. Get ready for the story. But let me take you back to how this all began 3 weeks earlier on a September evening that started like any other. The Chicago wind carried the scent of rain through the streets as Elena Vasquez adjusted her apron and glanced at the clock. 11:30 p.m. Only 30 more minutes until Rosita's Kitchen closed for the night. The small Mexican restaurant where she'd worked for 2 years was nearly empty, just a few lingering customers nursing their coffee and flan. That's when he walked in. Eleanor had served hundreds of customers, but this man was different. Everything about him commanded attention, the way he moved with predatory grace. The expensive Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than her monthly rent, the silver threading through his dark hair that spoke of distinguished power rather than age. But it was his eyes that made her pulse quicken. Dark, calculating, dangerous. He chose a corner booth, positioning himself with a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen. Elena approached with her usual professional smile, notepad ready. "Good evening. What can I get you started with?" Instead of answering, he studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low rumble with traces of an accent she couldn't quite place. "Just coffee. Black." As Elena poured the coffee, she noticed the intricate tattoo peeking from beneath his expensive watch, some kind of crest or family symbol. When their fingers briefly touched during the exchange, she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static. "Will there be anything else, sir?" He leaned back, still watching her with those predatory eyes. "Tell me, what do you know about respect, little waitress?" The condescending tone rankled, but Elena had dealt with difficult customers before. "I know it's earned, not demanded." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps or approval. He reached into his jacket and placed a crisp $100 bill on the table for a $5 cup of coffee. "Keep the change." He stood to leave, then paused. "I'll be seeing you again soon." Eleanor. The fact that he knew her name when she'd never given it sent chills down her spine. After he left, Eleanor found herself staring at the $100 bill, her hands trembling slightly. Her co-worker, Maria, appeared at her shoulder, eyes wide. Who was that man? He looked dangerous, Elena finished. Very dangerous. What Elena didn't notice was the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the way its occupants had photographed everyone who entered and left the restaurant. She was too focused on the memory of dark eyes and the inexplicable feeling that her quiet, predictable life had just taken a sharp turn into unknown territory. Eleanor spent the next 3 days trying to forget about the mysterious customer, but every time the door chimed, her heart raced with the irrational fear or hope that he might return. She threw herself into her routines. Morning classes at Chicago Community College, afternoon study sessions at the library, evening shifts at Rosita's. On Thursday night, he came back. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him. Both large, alert, their suits cut to conceal weapons Eleanor was now certain they carried. The trio took the same corner booth, and Elena's manager Carlos nervously gestured for her to serve them. "Evening," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "The usual coffee?" The man, she still didn't know his name, smiled, and for a brief moment he looked less like a predator and more like a man who found her amusing. "You remember?" "I'm impressed," he gestured to his companions. "My associates will have the same." As Elena served the 3 men, she caught fragments of their conversation, mentions of shipments, territories, and names that meant nothing to her but seemed to carry weight with them. What troubled her most was how they switched seamlessly between English and Spanish, and how the mysterious man kept glancing her way as if testing something. "¿Crees que ella entiende?" "Do you think she understands?" one of the other men asked quietly. Her customer leaned back, never taking his eyes off Elena. "No lo sé, pero vamos a averiguarlo." "I don't know, but we're going to find out." Elena kept her expression neutral, continuing to wipe down nearby tables while mentally processing their Spanish. They were definitely talking about her, and whatever they were planning wasn't good. When she brought their check, the man handed her another 100. "For your excellent service," he said in English. Then, switching to rapid Spanish, he added, Esta niña no tiene idea de lo peligroso que puede ser este mundo. This girl has no idea how dangerous this world can be. Elena smiled sweetly and responded in perfect Spanish. Oh, pero señor, entiendo más de lo que usted piensa. ¿Y el peligro? Bueno, eso depende de con quién esté hablando. Oh, but sir, I understand more than you think. And danger, well, that depends on who you're talking to. The silence that followed was deafening. Both of his companions shifted uncomfortably, and she caught one of them reaching subtly for something inside his jacket. But her mysterious customer did something unexpected. He threw back his head and laughed. Bien jugado, he said, standing. Very well played indeed. As the three men prepared to leave, he leaned close to Elena, his breath warm against her ear. My name is Ricardo Delacroix, and you, little waitress, have just become very interesting to me. After they left, Carlos appeared beside her, his face pale. Elena, do you know who that was? Ricardo something? Why? Carlos grabbed her arm. Delacroix, as in the Delacroix family, as in one of the most powerful crime organizations in Chicago. His voice dropped to a whisper. What did you say to him? Elena's stomach plummeted as the implications hit her. She'd just challenged a Mafia boss, in Spanish, in front of his men, and instead of being insulted, he'd seemed intrigued. I think, she said slowly, I just made either the best decision or the worst mistake of my life. That night, Elena noticed the same black sedan parked outside her apartment building. When she peeked through her curtains, she saw a man in the driver's seat, smoking and watching her windows. She was definitely being watched now. For the next week, Elena lived in a state of hypervigilance. The black sedan appeared at random times, outside the restaurant, near her apartment, even parked across from her college campus. She started varying her routes and schedules, but the watchers seemed to anticipate her every move. Ricardo didn't return to the restaurant, but his presence haunted every shadow. Elena was leaving her afternoon statistics class when she felt eyes on her. Turning, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against an expensive car parked illegally in the loading zone. Ricardo Delacroix stood in perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking completely out of place among the college students, but utterly comfortable in his own skin. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and he gestured slightly toward his car, an invitation or a command. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Elena walked toward him. Mr. Delacroix, are you following me? Protecting you, he corrected, opening the passenger door. Get in. I don't think that's a good idea. His expression darkened slightly. Elena, in the past week, 3 different organizations have started asking questions about you. Your name, your schedule, your family. Getting in this car isn't a request. The gentle threat in his voice was unmistakable. Elena looked around the busy campus, weighing her options. Students walked past them, oblivious to the dangerous undercurrent of the conversation. She slid into the passenger seat. The interior of the car was all black leather and understated luxury. Ricardo closed her door and walked around to the driver's side with measured steps. Once inside, he didn't start the engine immediately. Tell me about your family, he said without preamble. Why? Because someone thinks you're valuable enough to investigate. I need to know why. Elena stared at her hands. There's nothing special about my family. My mom died when I was 15. Dad works construction. I have a younger brother in high school. Your mother's maiden name? Vasquez. Look, I don't understand why any of this matters. Ricardo studied her profile. Your Spanish is too good for someone who learned it at home, too formal. Where did you really learn it? The question caught her off guard. My grandmother taught me. She was very traditional, insisted on proper grammar. What was her full name? Elena hesitated. There was something in his tone, a sharp focus that made her nervous. Elena Maria Vasquez de Morales. I was named after her. Ricardo's hand stilled on the steering wheel. Morales. From where? Mexico, originally. But she came here when she was young, during some kind of family trouble. She never talked about it much. The temperature in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ricardo started the engine and pulled into traffic with more urgency than before. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. You're in more danger than I thought. Elena's pulse quickened. What aren't you telling me? Instead of answering, Ricardo pulled out his phone and spoke in rapid Spanish to someone on the other end. Elena caught enough to understand he was calling for increased security and background checks on someone named Morales. When he hung up, she grabbed his arm. Tell me what's happening. Now. Ricardo glanced at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, She saw something like concern in his eyes. The Morales family was one of the most powerful crime dynasties in Mexico 30 years ago. They controlled territories, politicians, judges. They also had a lot of enemies. Elena's blood went cold. What happened to them? They were betrayed, wiped out almost entirely in a single night of violence that became legend even in our world. He pulled into the parking lot of an upscale hotel. If your grandmother was a Morales, and if the right people find out, they'd want to finish what was started 30 years ago, Elena whispered, the pieces falling into place. Ricardo nodded grimly. Welcome to my world, Elena, where the past never stays buried and blood calls to blood across generations. As they sat in the parking lot, Elena watched normal people go about their normal lives through the hotel's glass doors, a family checking in for vacation, a businessman heading to a meeting, a couple holding hands as they walked toward the elevator. She'd woken up that morning as a college student and waitress. Now she was sitting in a car with a crime boss, learning that her beloved grandmother had been part of a world Elena never knew existed, and somewhere out there, people who'd killed her family decades ago might be preparing to finish the job. Ricardo's penthouse suite overlooked Lake Michigan, all floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture that screamed money and power. Elena stood near the windows, watching boats navigate the dark water below while trying to process everything Ricardo had told her. Your grandmother was smart to change her name and disappear, Ricardo said from behind her. He'd shed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing more of the intricate tattoos that decorated his forearms. Elena Maria Morales was supposed to be dead. If she survived the massacre, she escaped with a baby, Elena said quietly. My grandmother used to have nightmares sometimes. She'd wake up crying and speaking in Spanish too fast for me to follow. Something about blood and fire and men with guns. Ricardo poured himself a whiskey from a crystal decanter. The Gutierrez cartel ordered the hit. They wanted the Morales territory and trafficking routes. They made sure to eliminate every family member, even distant cousins. But they missed my grandmother and Mom. It appears so. He approached the windows, standing close enough that Elena could smell his cologne, expensive and subtly masculine. The question is whether they know they missed them. Elena turned to face him, studying the sharp angles of his face in the reflected light from the water. How do you know so much about this? Because my family has been fighting the Gutierrez cartel for 20 years. They killed my father when I was 17. The admission hung between them, heavy with shared loss. Elena found herself looking at Ricardo with new eyes, not just as a dangerous stranger who'd invaded her life, but as someone who understood what it meant to inherit violence from previous generations. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't be. It made me who I am. He moved closer, and Elena felt the familiar electricity that sparked whenever he was near. The question is, what do we do about who you are? Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. Ricardo glanced at it, and his expression immediately hardened. What is it? Marco just sent surveillance footage from your apartment building. Black SUV with tinted windows circled the block 6 times in the past hour. 2 men in the lobby asking questions about your schedule. Eleanor's knees went weak. They found me. It was inevitable. The moment you responded to me in Spanish at the restaurant, anyone watching would have started digging deeper. Ricardo set down his glass and faced her fully. Eleanor, I can protect you, but it means entering my world completely. No more college, no more normal life, no more pretending you're just a waitress. And if I say no? His silence was answer enough. Elena sank into one of the leather armchairs, feeling the weight of an impossible choice. This is insane. 3 days ago, my biggest worry was making rent. 3 days ago, you were living a lie, Ricardo said gently but firmly. Your grandmother built you a beautiful normal life by hiding who you really are. But lies don't last forever, especially when they're built on blood. A soft chime from Ricardo's phone interrupted them. He read the message and Elena watched his jaw tighten. They're moving faster than expected. Marco intercepted communications. The Gutierrez people have confirmation that Elena Morales had a daughter who had a daughter. They're planning to move on you tonight. Elena shot to her feet. Tonight, but I need to pack. I need to tell my dad and brother. No. Ricardo's voice was absolute. Anyone you contact becomes a target. Anyone you try to protect becomes leverage against you. The reality hit her like a physical blow. In a span of hours, she'd lost everything. Her home, her family, her identity, her future. All because of a grandmother's secret she'd never even known existed. I can't just abandon them. Ricardo moved to a wall safe hidden behind a painting, entering a complex code. You're not abandoning them. You're protecting them. As long as the Gutierrez cartel believes you're dead or unreachable, your family stays safe. He withdrew several items from the safe, cash, documents, and a small handgun that gleamed dully in the lamplight. Elena stared at the weapon. I don't know how to use that. You'll learn, along with everything else you'll need to survive in this world. Ricardo's eyes met hers, dark and intense. Elena, I need you to understand something. Once you walk out of here with me, there's no going back. You'll be under my protection, which means you'll be part of my organization. You'll see things, know things, do things that normal people never have to face. And if I'm not strong enough, then you'll die. His bluntness was cruel but honest. But I don't think you're weak, Elena. You've been preparing for this your whole life without knowing it. The woman who faced down 3 armed men in a restaurant isn't going to break easily. Elena looked out at the city lights, thinking of her father working late shifts to pay for her education, her brother practicing for his high school football team, the simple life she'd taken for granted. Then she thought of her grandmother's nightmares, the fear that had shaped an old woman's dreams for decades. Maybe Ricardo was right. Maybe she'd been living a lie. If I do this, she said finally, I want to know everything. No more secrets, no more protecting me from the truth. Ricardo nodded slowly. Everything. Starting with why the Morales name is more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. As if summoned by his words, his phone rang. Ricardo answered with a sharp yes, then listened for 30 seconds, his expression growing darker with each word. When he hung up, Elena knew her decision had just been made for her. What happened? Fire at your apartment building, started in your unit specifically, no casualties, but... He met her eyes. There's no home left to go back to. The message was clear. The Gutierrez cartel knew exactly where she lived and weren't being subtle about their intentions. Elena Vasquez, college student and waitress, had just ceased to exist. The safe house was a nondescript brownstone in Lincoln Park, surrounded by similar buildings that housed young professionals and small families. Inside, however, it was a fortress. Reinforced walls, bulletproof windows, and enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small army. Elena sat at the kitchen table, staring at documents that told the real story of her family's past. Photographs, newspaper clippings, FBI reports, and genealogy charts that painted a picture of a criminal empire she'd never known existed. Your great-grandfather built an organization that controlled everything from the Texas border to Guatemala, Ricardo explained, settling into the chair across from her. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking, political corruption, the Morales family had their hands in it all. Elena studied a photograph of a distinguished man in an expensive suit, surrounded by other well-dressed men. The resemblance to her grandmother was unmistakable. This is him? Elena Maria's father? Don Alejandro Morales, one of the most feared men in Mexico during his time. Ricardo pointed to another photo. And this was your great-uncle, Roberto. He ran the American operations. The next photo made Elena's blood run cold. Roberto Morales lay dead in what appeared to be a restaurant, blood pooling around his body while shocked diners cowered in the background. The Gutierrez cartel killed him first, Ricardo continued, his voice matter-of-fact. It was meant to send a message that nowhere was safe, not even in public. Then they systematically eliminated every other family member they could find. Elena flipped through more photographs, bodies, burning buildings, newspaper headlines about gang wars and federal investigations. How did my grandmother escape all this? She was smart and lucky. According to our intelligence, she was visiting a convent in Guadalajara when the attacks began. The nuns hid her and your infant mother, then smuggled them across the border with new identities. And you know all this because... Ricardo leaned back, studying her face carefully. Because my family has been hunting the Gutierrez cartel for 2 decades. Your family's destruction was just the beginning of their expansion into our territories. Elena set down the photographs, feeling overwhelmed by the scope of violence that had shaped her bloodline without her knowledge. So this is about revenge? You're using me to get to them? Initially, yes. His honesty was brutal but somehow reassuring. When I realized who you were, I saw an opportunity. The last surviving Morales could be valuable leverage against the Gutierrez organization. And now? Ricardo's pause told her everything. Now it's complicated. Before Elena could respond, the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside sent Ricardo to his feet immediately. He moved to a window, peering through blinds, while speaking quickly into his phone. "Marcus, report." Elena watched his face darken as he listened to the response. "How many? When?" Another pause. "Fall back to position 3, we're moving." He hung up and turned to Elena with grim urgency. "They found us. 6 vehicles, at least 20 men. We have maybe 2 minutes before they breach the perimeter." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "How is that possible? Someone leaked our location. We have a traitor in the organization." Ricardo was already moving, grabbing weapons from hidden compartments while tossing Elena a bulletproof vest. "Put this on, now." "Ricardo, I don't know how to fight." "You don't have to fight. You just have to survive." He handed her the pistol from the safe. "Point it at anyone who isn't me or my men. Pull the trigger if they get close." The first gunshots echoed from somewhere outside, rapid and professional. Elena struggled with the vest, her hands shaking as she tried to fasten the straps. "Listen to me," Ricardo said, gripping her shoulders. "There's an emergency exit in the basement that leads to the storm drains. If something happens to me, you follow that tunnel north for exactly 12 blocks, then surface at the warehouse district. Marco will be waiting." "What do you mean, if something happens?" Glass shattered somewhere in the front of the house. Men were shouting in Spanish, and Elena could hear heavy footsteps moving through the first floor. Ricardo kissed her forehead quickly, a gesture that somehow managed to be both protective and desperate. "Elena, what I told you about this being complicated, I meant it. You're not just leverage anymore." "Then what am I?" "Mine," he said fiercely, then moved toward the sounds of invasion. Elena crouched behind the kitchen island, pistol gripped in both hands as she'd seen in movies, trying to control her breathing while chaos erupted around her. Men shouted commands in Spanish and English, furniture crashed and gunfire echoed through the rooms above her. Through the kitchen doorway she caught glimpses of the battle, Ricardo and his men moving with practiced efficiency, taking cover and returning fire against intruders who seemed to know exactly how to breach their defenses. Then Elena heard something that made her blood freeze. "Encontramos a la nieta de Morales." "We found the Morales granddaughter. They weren't just here to kill her. They were here specifically for her, using her real family name, which meant they knew everything, who she was, what she represented, and why she mattered to their decades-old war." A shadow moved across the kitchen doorway. Elena raised the pistol, finger on the trigger, as a stranger in tactical gear stepped into view. Their eyes met for a split second, and she saw recognition and calculation in his gaze. "Elena Morales," he said in accented English, "your family sends their regards." The moment stretched between them, like a held breath. Elena realized this was the moment that would define the rest of her life, however long that might be. She could surrender and hope for mercy from people who had shown none to her family 30 years ago. Or she could prove that Morales' blood still carried the strength to fight back. Elena pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the kitchen like thunder. Elena watched the man collapse, blood spreading across his tactical vest, his eyes wide with surprise that quickly faded to nothing. She'd killed someone. The pistol trembled in her hands as the reality hit her like a physical blow. "Elena!" Ricardo's voice cut through her shock. He appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with rapid assessment. His expression shifted from concern to something like pride. "Good girl. Stay low." The battle raged for another 10 minutes, an eternity of gunfire and shouted commands that left Elena crouched behind the kitchen island, trying not to look at the body she'd created. When silence finally fell, Ricardo's voice called out in Spanish, confirming casualties and securing the perimeter. Elena emerged from cover on shaking legs. The safe house was destroyed, furniture overturned, windows shattered, walls pocked with bullet holes. 3 bodies lay in the living room, all wearing the same tactical gear as the man she'd shot. "How many of yours?" she asked quietly. "1 wounded, none dead. We were lucky." Ricardo holstered his weapon and moved to Elena, his hands gentle as he checked her for injuries. "You did well. That man would have killed you without hesitation." "I know." Elena's voice sounded strange to her own ears, steadier than she felt. "Is it always like this?" "No," Ricardo said, pulling out his phone to coordinate cleanup. "This was personal. They came prepared for war." He paused, studying her face. "How do you feel?" Elena considered the question honestly. "Different. Like something fundamental just changed." Ricardo nodded slowly. "It did. You crossed a line tonight that most people never face. There's no going back to who you were before. As his men worked to secure the scene and dispose of evidence, Ricardo led Elena to a secondary vehicle. The drive through Chicago's night streets was tense and silent, both of them processing what had happened. "Where are we going now?" "My personal residence. It's more secure than any safe house." Ricardo glanced at her profile. "Elena, what happened tonight proves they're not going to stop. The Gutierrez cartel won't rest until they finish what they started with your family." "Then what do you propose?" Ricardo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We finish it first." They pulled into the underground garage of a gleaming downtown high-rise. The elevator rose smoothly to the penthouse, and Elena found herself in Ricardo's private domain, sleek, masculine, and fortified like a beautiful prison. "There's something you need to understand," Ricardo said, as they stood in his living room surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Tonight changed everything between us." Elena turned to face him, noting the intensity in his dark eyes. "How?" "You killed for me. In our world, that creates bonds that go deeper than law or logic." He moved closer, and Elena felt the familiar electricity that sparked between them. "You're not just under my protection anymore. You're mine, in every way that matters." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Elena felt something awaken in response, a fierce certainty that surprised her with its strength. "And you're mine," she said quietly, reaching up to touch the scar that ran along his jawline. "In every way that matters." Ricardo's control finally snapped. He pulled her against him, kissing her with desperate hunger while his hands tangled in her hair. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, the air between them crackled with unspoken promise. "Elena," he said against her lips, "once we cross this line—" "We already crossed it the moment I pulled that trigger," she interrupted. "Everything else is just details." But even as Ricardo carried her toward his bedroom, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that their enemies were already planning their next move. And somewhere in Ricardo's organization, a traitor was feeding information to people who wanted them both dead. Elena woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of urgent voices. Sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The safe house, the gunfight, the man she'd killed, and everything that had happened afterward with Ricardo. She found him in his study, fully dressed in a sharp business suit, speaking rapidly in Spanish to three men she didn't recognize. Maps and photographs covered his desk, and everyone's expressions were grim. "Elena," Ricardo looked up as she entered, his eyes softening momentarily before returning to business. "Come here, you need to hear this." One of the men, older with silver hair and intelligent eyes, stepped forward. "Miss Morales, I'm Detective Santos, Chicago PD. I work with Ricardo on matters of mutual interest." Elena raised an eyebrow. Ricardo had cops on his payroll. She shouldn't be surprised, but it drove home just how deep his influence ran. "What's happening?" "The men who attacked you last night were just the beginning," Santos explained, pointing to surveillance photos on the desk. "We intercepted communications this morning. The Gutierrez cartel has sent their best enforcer to Chicago, a man called El Cazador, the Hunter." Ricardo's jaw tightened. "Miguel Gutierrez's personal assassin. He's the one who orchestrated the original Morales massacre." Elena stared at a surveillance photo of a middle-aged man with cold eyes and scarred hands. "He killed my family?" "He killed everyone," Ricardo confirmed. "Women, children, elderly relatives, no one was spared." Santos opened a file folder. "Elena, we have evidence that El Cazador personally executed your great-grandfather and great-uncle. He's been bragging about it for 30 years. A cold fury settled in Elena's chest, surprising her with its intensity. "When does he arrive?" "He's already here," Ricardo said grimly. "And he knows we have you." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Elena was no longer just a target. She was bait in a trap that could spring either direction. "There's more," Santos continued reluctantly. "Our intelligence suggests someone in your organization fed them the safe house location." Ricardo's expression turned deadly. "I've been conducting my own investigation. There are only 5 people who knew where we'd taken Elena." "Who?" Elena asked. "Marcus, Tony, Lucia, Father Miguel, and—" Ricardo paused, his face hardening. "And my cousin Carlos." Elena remembered Carlos, Ricardo's second-in-command, the man who'd been like a brother to him since childhood. The possibility of his betrayal hung in the air like poison. "We need proof before we act," Santos warned. If you're wrong about Carlos, if I'm wrong, Helena dies, Ricardo cut him off. If I'm right and don't act, Elena dies. The choice is simple. Elena studied the photos and maps, her mind working through the tactical situation. What if we use their trap against them? All three men looked at her with surprise. El Cazador is here for me specifically, she continued. He wants to finish what he started with my family. What if we let him think he's found an opening? Absolutely not, Ricardo said immediately. I won't use you as bait. You're not using me. I'm volunteering. Elena met his eyes steadily. This man murdered my family. He destroyed my grandmother's life and stole my mother's birthright. I want him to face me. Santos shook his head. Miss, this isn't some movie. El Cazador is a professional killer with decades of experience. And I'm a Morales, Elena replied with quiet steel. He may have killed my family, but he didn't kill what we are. Ricardo stared at her for a long moment, seeing something in her expression that made him nod slowly. What do you have in mind? We find out who the traitor is first, Elena said. Then we use them to feed false information to El Cazador, make him come to us on our terms. Over the next hour, they planned an elaborate deception. Each of Ricardo's 5 trusted associates would be given different information about Elena's location and security arrangements. Whichever version reached El Cazador would reveal the traitor's identity. As the men prepared to set the plan in motion, Ricardo pulled Elena aside. Are you certain about this? Once El Cazador knows where to find you, there's no calling it back. Elena thought about her grandmother's nightmares, her mother's early death from stress-related illness, the quiet life of fear and hidden truth that had shaped her family for decades. He took everything from us once, she said quietly. I won't let him do it again. Ricardo cupped her face in his hands. Elena, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to either of us, she interrupted. We're going to end this together. But even as Ricardo kissed her, Elena caught him exchanging a meaningful look with Santos. They were planning something they weren't telling her, and that realization sent a chill down her spine. The trap was sprung within 18 hours. Carlos, Ricardo's beloved cousin and trusted lieutenant, had been the one feeding information to the Gutierrez cartel. The betrayal cut Ricardo deeper than any physical wound, but his response was swift and merciless. Elena watched from the penthouse as Carlos was brought in, hands zip-tied behind his back, his face already showing signs of interrogation. The man who'd been like a brother to Ricardo now looked broken and desperate. Why? Ricardo's voice was quietly lethal as he circled his bound cousin. 23 years we've been family. I trusted you with my life, with my organization, with everything that mattered to me. Carlos kept his eyes on the floor. They have my daughter, Ricardo, my little Maria. They took her 3 months ago and said they'd send her back piece by piece if I didn't cooperate. The admission hit the room like a bomb. Elena felt Ricardo's anguish as if it were her own, betrayed by someone he loved, who'd had good reasons for the betrayal. You should have come to me, Ricardo said, his voice cracking slightly. We could have found another way. There was no other way. Carlos looked up, tears streaming down his face. So you don't have children, Ricardo. You don't understand what it's like to hear your baby screaming over the phone while animals tell you exactly what they're going to cut off next. Elena stepped forward, her heart breaking for both men. Where is she? Your daughter. Carlos studied her with desperate hope. El Cazador has her. She's his insurance policy to make sure I deliver you. Then we get her back, Elena said simply. Ricardo spun to face her. Elena, no. We're not walking into their trap to save. Yes, we are, Elena interrupted with quiet authority. Because that's what family does, and Carlos is your family, which makes his daughter mine. For a moment, Ricardo just stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression, a recognition that the woman he'd fallen in love with had depths of strength and loyalty that matched his own. The meeting is set for tomorrow night, Carlos whispered. The old Gutierrez warehouse on the south side. El Cazador wants to finish this personally. Santos consulted his files. That warehouse is a fortress, concrete construction, limited access points, perfect for an ambush. Then we don't play their game, Elena said. We change the rules. Over the next several hours, they planned an operation that would have impressed military strategists. Ricardo's contacts in the police department would coordinate with federal agents who'd been trying to build a case against the Gutierrez cartel for years. Elena would indeed walk into the trap, but not alone and not helpless. The key is timing, Detective Santos explained as they reviewed blueprints. Elena goes in first, gets them to reveal Maria's location. Once we confirm the girl is safe, we move. Ricardo checked his weapons one final time. Elena, once you're inside with El Cazador, you'll be on your own until we can breach their perimeter. Are you prepared for that? Elena thought about the man she'd killed just days earlier. The way her training with Ricardo's weapons experts had awakened instincts she didn't know she possessed. I'm ready. But as night fell over Chicago, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that El Cazador had one final surprise waiting, something that would test not just her courage, but the very foundation of everything she'd built with Ricardo. The warehouse district was a maze of shadows and industrial decay. As Elena walked toward the designated building, she could feel eyes watching from hidden positions. Ricardo's men were in place, but so were El Cazador's. At the entrance, 2 guards searched her thoroughly before escorting her inside. The warehouse was vast and dimly lit, filled with shipping containers that created a labyrinth of hiding places. El Cazador waited in the center, an older man whose mild appearance contrasted sharply with the aura of violence that surrounded him. Beside him, a young girl, no more than 8, sat bound to a chair, her eyes wide with terror. "Elena Morales," El Cazador said, his voice carrying the faint accent of educated Mexico. "You look just like your great-grandfather. Same stubborn chin, same defiant eyes." "Let the girl go," Elena replied, her hand resting on the concealed weapon Ricardo had insisted she carry. "Your fight is with me. My fight was with your family, and I finished it 30 years ago. You're just cleaning up loose ends." He smiled coldly. "But I'll admit I'm curious. What made the little waitress think she could challenge me?" Elena stepped closer, every instinct screaming danger. "Maybe because you missed something important 30 years ago. And what's that? You never actually killed all of us." The gunshot came from behind her, and Elena felt fire tear through her shoulder as she spun, raising her own weapon. But El Cazador wasn't where she'd expected him to be, and neither was the little girl. "Welcome to the real trap, Elena Morales." El Cazador's voice echoed from somewhere in the shadows. "Did you really think it would be this simple?" Blood ran down Elena's arm as she took cover behind a shipping container, her shoulder burning where the bullet had grazed her. The warehouse had erupted into chaos, gunfire echoing from multiple directions, shouts in Spanish and English, the sound of men moving through the maze of containers. "Elena!" Ricardo's voice cut through the noise closer than she'd expected. He was inside, which meant the plan had already gone wrong. "I'm here," she called back, pressing her hand against her wounded shoulder to slow the bleeding. "They have the girl." El Cazador's laughter echoed through the warehouse. "Señorita Morales, your boyfriend walked into my trap very predictably. Love makes men stupid, don't you think?" Elena peered around the container's edge, trying to locate the voice. The warehouse was a shooter's nightmare. Too many hiding places, too many angles, too many opportunities for ambush. "Ricardo, where are you?" "North side, moving toward the center," his voice came back. "Santos is coordinating the outside team. We have the building surrounded." "How touching," El Cazador called out. "The last Morales and her new protector, dying together where her family's empire should have ended decades ago." A small voice cried out in Spanish. The little girl, Maria, somewhere deeper in the warehouse. Elena's heart clenched. Whatever happened between her and El Cazador, that child was innocent. Elena made a decision that would have horrified Ricardo if he'd known. She broke cover, moving toward El Cazador's voice with deliberate steps. "I'm here," she called out. "Just me, no weapons." She dropped her pistol where it clattered on the concrete floor. "Let the girl go and finish what you started with my family." "Elena, what are you doing?" Ricardo's voice was sharp with panic. "What I should have done from the beginning," she replied, stepping into the open center of the warehouse. El Cazador emerged from behind a container, dragging Maria with him. The little girl was crying silently, her eyes huge with terror. Up close, Elena could see the family resemblance. This was definitely Carlos's daughter. "Very noble," El Cazador said, keeping Maria positioned between himself and Elena. "Your great-grandfather had the same misguided sense of honor. It made killing him quite satisfying." "Tell me about it," Elena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Tell me how you murdered my family." El Cazador's eyes lit up with cruel memory. "Your great-grandfather begged at the end, not for his own life, but for his family's. He offered me everything, money, territory, his complete surrender, if I would spare the women and children. But you killed them anyway. Every single one. The old man watched his sons die first, then his daughters-in-law, then his grandchildren. I saved him for last so he could see what his pride had cost. Eleanor felt rage build in her chest like a living thing. And my grandmother. Ah, Elena Maria, the one who got away. El Cazador's expression darkened. She should have died with the rest. Tonight I correct that mistake. You're right, Elena said quietly. You should have killed her, because she lived long enough to teach me who I really am. With lightning speed, Elena grabbed a concealed knife from her boot, the backup weapon Ricardo had insisted on, and threw it with deadly accuracy. The blade buried itself in El Cazador's shoulder, causing him to release Maria with a scream of pain and rage. "Run!" Elena shouted to the girl, who scrambled away toward the shadows. El Cazador raised his gun, blood streaming down his arm, his face contorted with fury. "You little—" The shot that cut him off came from behind Elena. Ricardo stepped out of cover, smoking pistol in his hand, his expression cold as winter. El Cazador collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Elena said, walking toward him. She picked up her dropped pistol, checking the chamber. 30 years too late, but it's finally over. El Cazador looked up at her, blood frothing at his lips. You think you've won? The cartel has dozens like me." "Maybe," Elena replied calmly. "But they'll have to go through both of us now." The final gunshot echoed through the warehouse like punctuation on a long, painful sentence. As police sirens wailed in the distance and Ricardo's men secured the area, Elena found herself holding a trembling Maria while Carlos was reunited with his daughter. The betrayal was forgiven in the face of a father's desperate love and a child's safe return. "Is it really over?" Elena asked Ricardo as they watched federal agents arrest the surviving cartel members. "This part is," Ricardo said, pulling her close despite her wounded shoulder. "But Elena, you need to understand something. Tonight, you didn't just survive the Gutierrez cartel, you eliminated them. That makes you something new in this world." Elena looked around the warehouse, at the bodies, the evidence of violence. The federal agents who would write reports that sanitized what had really happened here. "What does it make me?" Ricardo's smile was proud and possessive. "It makes you exactly what I always knew you were, a Morales, and mine." But even as Elena leaned into his embrace, she couldn't shake the feeling that ending one war might have just started another. In the criminal underworld, power vacuums were dangerous things, and the woman who'd just eliminated a major cartel would be both respected and targeted by every ambitious organization in the city. 3 months later, Elena stood on the balcony of Ricardo's penthouse, watching the Chicago skyline glitter in the winter twilight. The shoulder wound had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar that Ricardo traced gently whenever he thought she wasn't paying attention. "The Martinelli family wants to meet," Ricardo said, joining her at the railing with 2 glasses of wine. "They're impressed by how you handled the Gutierrez situation." Elena accepted the glass, noting how naturally she'd adapted to discussions of criminal politics over dinner. "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where they officially recognize you as a legitimate power in the organization." Ricardo studied her profile. "Elena, they want to offer you territory. Your own operations, your own crew." It was an extraordinary offer. In 3 months, she'd gone from waitress to being courted by established crime families. The girl who'd once worried about making rent was now being offered control of illegal enterprises worth millions. "And what do you want?" she asked. Ricardo set down his wine and turned her to face him. "I want you to marry me." Elena's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me, Elena. Not for politics or alliances or territorial arrangements. Marry me because I love you more than my own life, and because you've become essential to everything I am." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a stunning diamond surrounded by emeralds, clearly custom-made and expensive beyond imagination. "Ricardo, I know it's complicated. I know this isn't the life you planned or the proposal you dreamed about as a little girl. But Elena, you and we're both products of violence and loss who found something beautiful together. Don't we deserve to keep it?" Elena stared at the ring, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. 3 months ago, she'd been a college student with simple dreams. Now she was a woman who'd killed multiple people, survived assassination attempts, and earned the respect of Chicago's most dangerous criminals. "The Martinellis," she said slowly. "If I accept their offer, if I build my own organization, what happens to us?" "We become the most powerful couple in the city," Ricardo replied. "Partners in every sense of the word. And if I say no to their offer, if I just want to be your wife and nothing else?" Ricardo's expression softened. "Then we disappear. Leave Chicago, leave this life, start over somewhere no one knows our names or our history." Elena looked out at the city that had become her kingdom and her prison. Somewhere down there, Carlos was rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. Detective Santos was filing reports that would keep federal attention focused elsewhere. Father Miguel was conducting funerals for men whose deaths would never be officially explained. This was her world now. Complex, dangerous, but undeniably real. "There's a third option," she said finally. "Which is?" Elena turned the ring over in her palm, admiring how the emeralds caught the light. "I accept their offer, build my own organization, and marry you. But we do it our way, with our rules." Ricardo raised an eyebrow. "What rules?" "No human trafficking, no drugs near schools, no violence against children or innocents." Elena met his eyes steadily. "And anyone who works for us gets a real chance at something better if they want out. You want to reform organized crime. I want to control it. There's a difference." Elena slipped the ring onto her finger, noting how perfectly it fit. "My great-grandfather built an empire through fear and brutality. Maybe it's time a Morales built one through loyalty and respect." Ricardo stared at her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed, the kind of genuine laughter she'd rarely heard from him. "Elena Morales," he said, pulling her into his arms, "you continue to amaze me. Is that a yes to my proposal?" "That's a yes to everything. Marriage, partnership, revolution, whatever you want to call what we're building together." As Ricardo kissed her, Elena felt the last pieces of her old life finally fall away. The frightened waitress who'd served coffee to a dangerous stranger was gone, replaced by a woman who could command empires and reshape the criminal underworld according to her own vision. 6 months later, the wedding was held in the private chapel of Ricardo's estate, attended by a unique guest list that included federal judges, police commissioners, and the heads of 5 major crime families. Elena walked down the aisle in her grandmother's wedding dress, carefully preserved for 70 years, carrying a bouquet that concealed a small pistol, because even on her wedding day, she was still Elena Morales. Father Miguel performed the ceremony, blessing a union that probably violated several church doctrines, but somehow felt more sacred than most. When Ricardo kissed his bride, the assembled guests, criminals and law enforcement alike, rose in applause for the couple who'd redefined power in Chicago. Later, as they danced to music that drifted across the estate gardens, Elena caught sight of Carlos teaching his daughter to waltz, while Santos argued politics with a federal judge. This was her family now, complicated, dangerous, but bound together by something stronger than blood or law. "Any regrets, Mrs. Delacroix?" Ricardo murmured against her ear. Elena smiled, thinking of her grandmother's journal hidden in their bedroom safe, the family recipes she'd taught the estate chef, the photograph of her parents that sat on Ricardo's desk beside images of his own lost family. "Just one," she said. "What's that?" "I wish my grandmother could have lived to see this. To know that the Morales family didn't end with fear and hiding. To see that we found a way to be powerful and honorable at the same time." Ricardo spun her slowly under the stars, his expression tender. "She knows, Elena. Wherever she is, she knows that her granddaughter finished what she started and built something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible." As the music swelled around them and Chicago's lights twinkled in the distance, Elena realized that some stories don't end. They just transform into new beginnings. The frightened girl who'd hidden behind a false identity was gone, but in her place stood a woman who'd learned that true power came not from violence or fear, but from the courage to be exactly who you were meant to be. Thlast Morales had finally come home,